Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to Guaranteed Irish webinar this morning on climate change and decarbonisation. What Irish businesses need to do now. So we all know it's a big topic at the moment, and we've got probably two of the best experts in the country. Well, one in the country and one out of the country for the moment. Speaking to you. So we're delighted to bring that to all our members and non-members who are engaged in this space at the moment and trying to work out what do we absolutely have to do in terms of our business and doing the right thing by both the business and indeed the planet and our shareholders, investors, etc. I'm delighted to welcome Eleanor Mcavoy, co-founder of Greenhouse, former Dragon of Dragon's Den, and you'd know Eleanor from TV. Eleanor, you're very welcome. Eleanor joins us from UK, but like myself, she's a Limerick woman, and delighted to have her join today. And she's ably accompanied with Mike Hayes, who all of you will probably know from both his columns in the paper and his work, which is tremendous. He's a global leader with KPMG on climate change and decarbonisation, and we're honoured to have both of you join us. It's been great to get such experts in the field to talk to our members, and I'm sure the attendance and registration is over the hundreds today, so I know there's a huge interest in it. Why have Guaranteed Irish got involved in this whole area, you might ask? Guaranteed Irish has always been about jobs, first and foremost. And in a society where jobs are all about being sustainable, we've found ourselves very much dragged into the sustainable aspect of life in our society. And of course, never more so now than we've come through COVID and Brexit. And people have realised the importance of the short supply chain and the importance of relying on each other. So there's been a lot of shifts, I suppose, in all our business. But most importantly, I suppose, when we look at what our job is to do, we always had and have huge value on the green aspect of businesses in general, and all our member businesses subscribe and aspire to that. 81% of Irish consumers at the end of Q1 in 2021 agree that Guaranteed Irish itself portrays an image of trust. And in any business, when you're moving, I suppose that's probably the biggest factor of doing business with another company. And 82% of the consumers at large in Ireland felt that the Guaranteed Irish symbol itself was the one symbol that stood out for them in terms of what it stood for. It meant that a business who carried the Guaranteed Irish G symbol was a company that was genuinely supporting jobs, genuinely supporting the communities in which it's based, and genuinely subscribing to the circular economy and those shorter supply chains. And one Guaranteed Irish business doesn't exist on its own. They tend to do business with each other, and that whole culture shifts between businesses then, which is really important and which we all aspire to. 94% of consumers then believe that by buying from the Guaranteed Irish brand, feel that they're reducing the carbon footprint. Now, we all know the consumer is very savvy, but they also feel that sense of responsibility. And again, COVID has really expedited this in our thought process, that we all have a personal responsibility to our environment, both in our work environment and our life environment, if you like. And if people are associating the G and Guaranteed Irish with the carbon reduction, well, we're in a space that we then ourselves have an obligation to make sure that we're delivering on that. And I'm delighted to announce this morning with our speakers that Guaranteed Irish has, after 50 years, completed its first hire of its first sustainable marketing executive, who will be joining us early next month, 1st of November. And that person will be available to all our members to help them reach their sustainable objectives and goals. And there's a big piece of work coming out of us in that green space. So we're really excited about that, and it's the area that we want to move on to. Finally, I suppose 95% of consumers overall in Ireland feel that by buying from a business with Guaranteed Irish, they're helping the local economy. And that was the one overarching feeling during COVID. People wanted to support home. Be they in France, they were the same. They felt they wanted to support the French economy. The English wanted to support the English economy. It didn't matter where you were from. We all huddled together, and the idea was to support each other. That's not to go back to our introspective life. We're very much global, and we're doing business as an island nation. We're absolutely dependent on that. But it's important that we do the two together, and when we fuse the homegrown and the international, there's a real opportunity for us to make some real magic there and keep Ireland punching above its weight, which we're used to. Now, of course, all I've left to do is to introduce you to the super panel we have for you this morning. So Mike, as you know yourself, I've just said, is the global climate change and decarbonisation leader in KPMG at a global level, not just at Ireland. He leads the climate impact change decarbonisation pillar of KPMG Impact, where he has responsibility for leading KPMG's work on the provision of decarbonisation and climate risk solutions for its global clients across all sectors. In particular, this work involves advising clients on setting and achieving their net zero ambitions. He is passionate about helping Irish businesses understand the reality of climate change. We cannot get a better authority on this area than Mike in this country, and we're just delighted to have you. And thank you, Mike, for giving us the time. I'm really appreciative of it. Eleanor Mcavoy is co-founder of Greenhouse. You know Eleanor from TV, and a seasoned entrepreneur herself who has successfully built businesses in various sectors. She was a finalist in EY Entrepreneur of the Year in both 2004 and 2013, and she's a board member of the Ernst & Young alumni. She's also a Dragon on Dragon's Den. More recently, she was appointed as the Entrepreneurial Ambassador for Northern Ireland, and she's passionate about being involved in projects that change how we live and now works to protect our environment and secure the future of our planet. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it, and we're all guilty of that. I think COVID has definitely made us realise we all have a job to do and we all have a responsibility. So thank you, both of you, for joining us this morning. So we're going to have a discussion. We have a few questions I want to put to the panel, but please, panel, join in. If I'm asking Eleanor the conversation, Mike, feel free to jump in, because what we want is engagement and we want questions coming off the audience. If you look at your screens, guys, anybody listening, we have a chat function. Make sure you put your questions in there, or questions, and we'll make sure we get those at the end of the session to the audience. So I'm going to kick off and not waste any more time. Eleanor, I suppose the budget next week is really on top of us at the moment. It's going to increase carbon taxes. How do we in our businesses address it, and where do we start?
Okay, well, first of all, good morning to everybody who's listening in, and I want to commend Breed and the team at Guaranteed Irish for having the foresight to actually addressing this event this morning, because it is the most critical thing that is facing all of us in our businesses and indeed our daily lives. With regard to the budget that's coming out, the carbon budget that's going to come out, it's going to be the first of many. So we will have 5-year budgets that will repeat right up to 2030. And I'd like to start off by saying that I hope this morning, and I am very flattered to be sharing a platform with Mike Hayes, who is an absolute authority in this space, that we can actually help demystify some of this journey and make the people listening realize, as opposed to this being a drudge and something we have to deal with, that actually it's a huge opportunity.
Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the word opportunity keeps coming up. I very much, as you know, and you've mentioned earlier, Breed, I've been talking and writing about the risk to Irish business, and I've been begging and pleading Irish business to take the climate issue very, very seriously. And to be fair, I think that's happening. And even if businesses are not taking it seriously, they're coming under extraordinary pressure from investors, from regulators and government, but not just those groups. Employees care. You know, if you worry about retention, and particularly in the resource-constrained economy that we have today, employees care about the purpose of an organization, customers care, and the other driver that's actually happening, Breed, is peer pressure. If you're in a particular sector, if your peers are taking advanced steps on climate, whether it's setting climate ambitions or something else, and you're not, you'll find yourself left behind very quickly. So there's very much the risk part to all of this. Flipping back to what Eleanor said, you know, think about it this way. We are creating a new economy. You know, if you thought the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago was huge, we are facing into something quite as dramatic as that. It is going to change the industrial, social, and business landscape as we know it today. I've been privileged to see fantastic presentations from luminaries visualizing what the 2050 future looks like. It could not be more different than what we have today. And as you see, you know, wind farms, and you see offshore turbines, and you see electric cars, that's only the beginning of a journey that's going to transform society. And any such transformation is always going to throw up opportunity. So while I plea at one level to Irish business to think about the risk parts of it, and that is very much the immediate focus, there's so much opportunity going to be created. There's new services, new goods. I will pick up the point about innovation, which is a really critical issue later on in the session, Breed. But you know, there are going to be winners and losers. The main thing is understand this agenda, understand what it's about, and actually figure out what part you're going to play in it. the worst thing Irish business can do is put its head in its sand and as you said at the outset, Breed, that it's somebody else's problem. It is not. It is a problem for every single business and every single citizen.
In one way, it's refreshing to hear it so dramatically put. In another way, it's a little bit scary, Mike. So thanks for letting us, not dressing it up. One of the things, I'm just going to continue on with you there, Mike, for a minute. A lot of people think it's really for the publicly listed companies and it's not for the small company. Now, obviously in Guaranteed Irish, we're a mix of from the small tiny candle maker at home at the kitchen table to the largest company in the country, CRH. All the bits in between are members as well. So is it effective? Is it going to affect the small business, and how can the small business respond, I suppose?
Yeah, I just want to address just first of all your comment about scaring. To be honest, that's where my head is at the moment. You know, if everybody saw what I saw and observe what's in front of us, and it's coming very, very quickly, I'm scared. And you know, a bit like COVID, it was only when we scared people into the seriousness of the pandemic that people reacted. So I just leave you with that thought on the scaring bit, Breed. Turning to your question, unfortunately, this, as I said a couple of minutes ago, this is not something for somebody else. It doesn't matter whether you're a big business or a small business. You know, climate matters, and I'm going to just develop this a little bit in terms of the drivers. You see, you're quite right. There's huge focus on publicly listed companies, and that's because the investment community cares. You can see announcements by institutional investors every day of the week where they say, we are going to stop investing in whether it's fossil fuels or oil and gas or coal mines or whatever. You know, that world of the publicly listed company, which, you know, we've only a handful of such companies here in Ireland, that's where the agenda has been driven over the last number of years. But in reality, once you understand the dynamic that's at play, it affects everybody. So let me just develop that in a couple of ways. First of all, you know, and you mentioned sort of government action. Governments are not standing idly by in this. Governments have reached a point where they know they have to take action. And we are going to see a raft of legislation which is designed to change behaviours on climate. That legislation will apply to everybody, and it's not just carbon taxes. We're entering into a world where the European Union actually is leading the way on this. The European Union is introducing fairly advanced measures, and the best example I have is this thing called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. If you're a company that's importing high carbon goods into the European Union, you are now going to be hit with an additional tax on top of your carbon taxes and your fuel duties and whatever else. We don't need to get into the detail of what's called CBAM, but it's a very, very serious measure. But the more important point, Breed, it just shows the intent of governments. The EU is going to be working with every single member state to actually get the member states to enforce these measures into their own legislation. So that's the regulatory bit. We'll go back then to what I said about the other drivers. You know, every company, you know, and particularly companies with aspirations to scale, you know, they will have to think about their employees and their customers. Customers are starting to vote. They are saying, you know, we want greener goods and services. It's not just because it's a good thing. They need to do it as part of their own net zero ambition. So I'm going to just give you a very practical example, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about scope 3 emissions. So let's say I'm a big global technology company. Doesn't matter whether I've got a headquarters or a big operation in Ireland or not. I'm a big global technology company. I will have made, almost inevitably, I'll have made a net zero commitment. But that net zero commitment applies not just to my own operations, it applies to my upstream and downstream operations. Therefore, if I'm a small company providing goods or services to that large technology company, that technology company is going to say to me, I want to see your decarbonisation plan. You know, and this is what scope 3 emissions are about. Scope 3 emissions are the emissions that are not in your own business, but they exist across your upstream and downstream supply chain. And just for a second, consider just the impact of that, Breed. What that is really saying is that you could be a small company, you could be a large company. If I want to do business with the really big companies, which I almost inevitably do, then I'm going to have to do something about my decarbonisation plans. There's one example, I won't name the technology company in place, but they have started imposing financial penalties on their suppliers where they have not met the type of decarbonisation standards that they expect. This is very real, and it's literally rippling throughout the economic landscape globally. So the point I'm trying to make, it's just a combination of a whole lot of different things. Last point I'll make, and again, this should give direction of travel. So the whole issue of reporting and disclosure is very important, but there's a new reporting measure that's coming in that is for the first time going to apply not just to listed companies, it's going to apply to large private companies across the European Union. It's going to replace something called the non-financial reporting directive, but really it's about reporting your exposure to climate risk and setting out your climate plans. So this, the overall point here, Breed, is we're only going to beat the climate challenge if everybody gets on board. So, whether you're a small company or a large company, I accept fully large companies are more advanced, are under more pressure today, but this would be an agenda for everybody.
Yeah, it's come up quite a lot, even in our own membership. We see it. Our small makers, providers, engineers, obviously food is a very obvious one, but you see them, they're realizing the chain that they're feeding into is demanding this, and there is a massive mind shift, and it's brilliant to see it. Eleanor, I want to ask you in terms of types of decarbonisation strategies that are out there. Are companies pursuing them in practice? I know you're working with a lot of companies in the renewables area, and is it all about carbon offsets, or are there other strategies being utilised?
One of the things when I start talking to companies about this, I hear language like we need to get in a consultant and we need to, understand this and look at our whole journey. My advice to people would be get started, because you're actually now going to be judged not on a paper plan that you're proposing you're going to do, but the actual actions you're taking. Talking about, I heard recently, without naming the company, there was a food company in Ireland who was guaranteed a huge contract with Marks and Spencer's, and they had put together a lovely document with all their planning over the last couple of years, but they actually hadn't implemented very much of it, and Marks and Spencer's just disconnected, because as Mike said, it's to do with the knock-on effect on their own carbon plan. But I want to particularly draw attention to, and it's one of the reasons I've got involved with a company called Green Has that you mentioned at the beginning. Green Has stands for Green Heat as a Service. Now, heat as a service, it is the good thing about this is for any business that gets involved with this company, it is a fully funded. So in other words, Green Has pays for the CapEx. It's a combination of solar, if solar is required to generate a certain amount of energy, but then it's employing through the technology of heat pumps and smart management and technology. So we provide heat as a service. So in other words, you buy heat from Green Has the same way that you buy electricity. Now, what does this do in terms of your business? It will reduce your carbon by up to 90%. And because of the efficiencies of heat pumps, you will actually produce 300% more heat than you would using traditional methods like gas, and your carbon reduction is huge. And just to put it in perspective, on the life of the partnership with the company between Green Has, you will save a minimum of 42% on carbon, and you will save up to 50% of the electricity you're using. So what does this do for the business? A, it decarbonizes. B, more importantly, it gives stability of pricing on heat going forward. Plus, we are your long-term partner in managing heat going forward. Now, I hope I've given an explanation on that, because it's a new concept, but as Mike said, one of the things that we have to be open to is new ways of doing things. And this is certainly a new way of managing heat, whether you're in manufacturing, whether it's spatial heating, or generating steam. So for anybody in that space, we're open to conversations.
Well, we're always interested in renewables. Sorry, Mike, coming in there. Coming in there in our copy. Oh, then.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Eleanor, it's a great example of the point you and I were making earlier, that this is not just about risk and doom and gloom, it's about opportunity as well. And I think it's a fantastic story. But also, if I could, Bree, just develop, something that Eleanor said, and one of my pet sort of obsessions in this industry, it's the whole area of energy efficiency. And you're providing electricity if you do solar and a heat solution, and it's brilliant. And I don't know whether what you would say, Eleanor, in terms of its cost effectiveness to customers, but energy efficiency is a really brilliant solution to reduce your carbon emissions, but also to reduce your actual cost of electricity in an organization. And the really crazy thing about energy efficiency is that it is probably the most underutilized solution across the business landscape. I am sick and tired of telling companies, there are providers out there like Eleanor and Greenhouse, and there's many others who provide these type of solutions, and they're cost-effective solutions. And I'm still struggling to really understand what the problem is. There is actually some accounting issues with the type of structures that Eleanor spoke about for certain types of energy efficiency equipment. Sometimes it's just plain inertia, and I think people like me and many others, we need to do a better job of educating Irish business about some of the low-hanging fruit type solutions that are available, and energy efficiency is just the best one. And to be fair, it's something the Irish government has got behind as well. A couple of years ago, the Irish government, through the ISIF, set up this thing called the Energy Efficiency Fund, really providing funding to help scale energy efficiency. I don't think it was the biggest success ever, because again, the market just
Have we lost him?
doesn't seem to understand the potential around energy efficiency, which is a pity, really.
Okay, great. I thought we lost you there for a moment, Mike, but you kicked right back in. I do want to take that point, and I do want to go. I've quite a lot of other questions, but it's something that the questions are filling up here hard and fast. And one of the things people are saying is, why is it taking so long? We're always talking about 2030, 2050. What's happening now, and are the government well equipped enough to make actions now? And I'll preface that by saying, I love your model, Eleanor, and you had told me about it. I love your model from the point of view that I don't have to go to any expense of installing it. The CapEx is covered. So that, for a small business, for our businesses in Guaranteed Irish, is probably a no-brainer. So they'll definitely be in contact with you. That's Greenhouse, H-A-A-S. But we'll talk about that towards the end. Can I just come back to you on that, Mike? Are the government doing things quickly enough? Because the consumer out there and businesses are frustrated about seeing this thing off in the distance. They feel they can do something now. What's going on there?
Quite a lot, Breed, is the answer. So I'm going to talk about deadlines generally, and tie it into what's happened, pre and post COVID. So first of all, we saw a raft of what are called net zero commitments by loads of global corporations and global governments. Some of them, or most of them, were 2050, and China, for example, was 2060. I can tell you that the 2050 deadline is gone. Nobody pays any attention to it anymore. At best, a 2040 deadline works. But now we've got this concept of interim targets. The message is very simple. You need to be able to show action on net zero between now and 2030. The recent report from the UN organization IPCC highlighted this. The problem is upon us. It is very, very real. Let me just give you a one practical example. And David Attenborough and others talk about this all the time. So there's loads of facts and figures about the carbon emissions that we emit today. But one of the biggest problems that's coming at us much, much quicker is what we call the melting of the permafrost, in Antarctica and at the North Pole. The scale of problems that will unleash is unreal. Two in particular. First, it will probably go close to adding another 50% of carbon emissions to our atmosphere, because they're all locked in this at the moment, but they're going to be released. But we've been through a horrendous 18 months with COVID-19, with one pathogen. The scientists will tell you we have seen nothing yet in terms of medical disasters and potential pandemic problems if this permafrost is melted, because it's going to release many, many more pathogens. Not many people are talking about this, but you look at the real experts, you look at David Attenborough, you look at Christina Figueres, the architect of the Paris Agreement. She is really doing her best to make people aware of this. So what's happening, and there's been a noticeable shift, and bear in mind, pre-COVID, we weren't having these type of discussions. It was on the agenda, but it wasn't really front and center. I think COVID has helped to really put the agenda front and center. The recent IPCC report has helped. Plus, you know, we've seen the type of weather events that have happened globally over the summer. So there is a new sense of emergency. And globally, you have a situation where the Biden administration, Russia, Middle Eastern powers, and particularly China, they mightn't agree on much else. They mightn't even agree on how to tackle this problem, but they all agree on the scale of the problem. So what's actually happening behind the scenes, Breed, and this will manifest itself ultimately into Irish government policy, is the global powers are really starting to accelerate actions. I can give you lots of examples of things they're going to do. We've got COP26, which is the Conference of Parties, which is the global convening of all the major governmental actors on climate change in Glasgow in a couple of weeks' time. You know, hard to know whether it's going to be a success or a failure, but the intent is there to really move now. There's going to be lots of different announcements at COP26. If I bring that back to Ireland, you know, you can see it. The Irish government, you know, this was not sort of a main agenda item for the Irish government 2 or 3 years ago. Today it is. Every government minister talks about it. They recognise it's important to every single portfolio that's been managed by government. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see more pronounced action by government over the shorter term. We clearly have our climate action plan here in Ireland, but you know, we'll have another one in 2 years' time, because the pace of change, the pace of focus is accelerating quickly. So nobody should be fooled into thinking this is a static agenda. It is continuously evolving. Our narrative is changing all the time. And there is, you know, I go back to the point about scaring people at the start. I genuinely don't mean to do that, but I am also genuinely concerned. I think more and more people get it. More and more people are saying we have got to do something. And again, I could take this in so many different directions, Breed. I really believe that we have to stop just looking at governments. You know, that is never going to be the answer. Governments have to do lots of wonderful and very innovative things to help on this agenda. We're focusing this morning a lot on the corporate agenda and what companies need to do, and companies are reacting to all sorts of pressure. But ultimately, one of my key messages is that this is something that affects every citizen on this planet. And I am passionately believe that we need citizens to start engaging more, taking it seriously, and asking about what more they can do in their lives. I'm just going to give you one. I'll stop then, Breed, because we'll run out of time before we know it. Just one sort of statistic. Mercer, the insurance giants, did a really interesting report recently, and they looked at all the different things you can do in your personal life to actually have a positive impact on the climate agenda. It could be your transport, you know, it could be what you eat. But the thing that by a country mile that made the most difference was actually what you did with your pension and your personal investments. The more you turn those into investing in green, the more positive impact it had on the climate agenda. And that there's a message in that. It just shows that as individuals, we have a role, but also we can do meaningful things on this agenda as well.
Okay, the panel, I need to ask a couple of more very serious questions, practical questions that can be implemented for our businesses. Can you explain what setting a net zero target actually means in practice for a small to medium business, and how do companies go about it, doing it, and what exactly is involved, cost, time, etc.?
Okay, can I take that one and try and, I like to bring things as simple as I possibly can. And you're talking about, Breed, about the timelines in the 2030s and the 2050s. What I would advise any business to do on to first look at where they are and look out at 2030 and work their way back to now in terms of what they're going to do and what they're going to have achieved by 2030. We talked earlier around the sort of look for the low-hanging fruit, look for the easy wins, dealing with things like how you generate your electricity and how you green the energy within your business. That's a relatively easy thing to start with. And, you know, one of the announcements, you're talking about government, if anybody actually wants to find it, go and look up the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Bill, which has come out from the government, which will very clearly show that the Irish government is very serious, because actually for the first time ever in this world, we're dealing with a problem that is global, and everything takes direction from the Paris Climate Agreement. And one of the things that they have done is around electricity. ESB networks had an ability to borrow up to 6 billion. The government have increased that by another 6 billion to allow ESB networks to upgrade the system so that they're going to be able to onboard more green energy. Now, that is critical to the electrification of the island. And that is the message that's going out there. We're about electrification. The other thing is that for the first time ever, every single government department has a responsibility around decarbonisation, as opposed to just one unit within government being set up. And one of the things that we have to realise as a country is that when the deadlines that we miss, the government is going to have to pay out huge fines, and I'm talking about in the billions. And we all know government doesn't pay bills, the citizens do and the businesses do. So it will end up costing. So really the answer is move quickly, start going now, so that we can avoid paying for something and instead engage early. And we have a reputation for being green as a country. Why not take it and decide as a country that we want to show leadership to the rest of the world in this space, and look at it as cleaner air for our children, cleaner environment for us to live in. I can't emphasize enough how important this is for every single thing we do in our daily lives.
So in terms of the practical things, Mike, the businesses that I'm referring to, how do they set about their zero target carbon piece? Other than what have you anything to add to that, other than what Eleanor has said in terms of looking at the electricity, referring to their targets? And we often hear about things like scope 1, 2, and 3. Can you explain that to us very concisely?
Yeah, I'll try very concisely. And so scope 1 is really the emissions that arise from your conducting your own operations. It could be because you've got a car fleet, for example, that are emitting carbon. Scope 2 is really what Eleanor was getting at, which is the emissions from the use of electricity in your organization. Very important and also very, very soluble. Scope 3 is the emissions that not in your own organization, but caused by upstream and downstream. This is what I was referring to earlier, that if you're an organization, you've made a net zero commitment, you need, and this is why it's not an easy thing, and I'll come back to smaller companies in a second. You need to get your supply chain and your downstream supply chain to decarbonize as well. And that's a big challenge. So most of the big companies globally who've made net zero commitments, they can get there either through their own operations or through offsets, and we should come back to the offset question as well. But decarbonizing their supply chain is a real challenge. The other question you asked me there, Bree, is what can you do? And to be honest, setting net zero commitments, and I get called in to help big private equity funds, big global corporations. We do these massive projects where we talk to everybody in the organization, we understand the business, we spend a couple of months figuring out the net zero commitment. I'm a slightly skeptical person on commitments, because the problem I have with commitments is that they're all well and good, but you haven't achieved anything. I'm big on action, and you asked me what specifically can companies do. So there's three or four things I'll mention. The area that Eleanor mentioned is actually really important, procuring renewable energy. Now that's easier when you're an organization with scale, because the renewable developers will only really entertain it when there's a sufficient size and there's a significant megawatt hours involved. The idea, and Eleanor's touched on this as well, the idea of self-generation, solar rooftop, or other localized solutions should not be discounted. And increasingly, as technology advances, we're going to see more localized solutions to enable self-generation of electricity. That's the first thing. The second thing I've already mentioned is energy efficiency. This is so simple. It can be done. It's a bit of upfront work. And what Eleanor said is really important. The financing solutions are there. This doesn't go on your balance sheet. You don't need to fund it, which is really important. The third one I wanted to talk about, and potentially this is a new topic for your members, Breed, is the issue of circular economy. But I would say now this morning at this session, your members will start to hear more about this, and in very, very simple terms. And there's many different ways of looking at this. Circular economy is about taking a bunch of techniques to look at your waste and the waste that you cause in your organization, and figuring out ways in which you can reutilize that waste. Not so much, it's kind of recycling plus plus. The whole concept is you understand the component parts of your waste. You look to see what parts of it can go back into the supply chain. So I'm involved in projects, for example, with a big pharmaceutical company where we're literally going through all the waste, and a percentage of it, not all of it, but a very significant percentage of it, instead of going to landfills, we are figuring out ways in which to find new ways where it goes back into what we call the remanufacturing process. And there's a global market emerging on this, what I would call remanufactured products coming out of waste. It is a very good example of the fact that decarbonisation solutions do not always involve cost. If that type of strategy is implemented, and I know it's not for everybody, if that type of strategy is implemented and done right, that can save money. Now, it's a new area, but this is the world we live and breathe with this space. All of it is new ultimately. Some of it is a bit more mature than others, but the European Union in particular is putting a really big push on circular economy. Without getting into detail, there's lots of what I would call company-specific initiatives you can do, from your travel policy to the, are you going to convert your cars to electric cars, all that type of thing, and we get into that sort of detail. The last thing I wanted to mention very briefly, Breed, is the whole world of carbon offsets, and I think you referred to this earlier. So carbon offsets is meant to be the residual solution. So in other words, whether you have a net zero strategy or not, the consensus globally now is focus on ways in which you can decarbonize your business in the way I've just described. Failing that, if you want to get to net zero, then you have to think about carbon offsets. And the problem with carbon offsets is that it's become a little bit of a tainted or a dirty word, because there is a big issue around the trustworthiness and the integrity of carbon offsets. So there's various markets around the world. They're called voluntary markets and national markets, and where you can literally go and buy carbon offsets, and it could be because somebody is getting a credit for not cutting down trees, or because they're developing cooking stoves in Kenya or something else. I mean, there's a whole variety of different business activities that give rise to these credits. But the problem that's happened in the market is that we found that there's two people claiming the same credit. When you work back and try to look to the provenance of the credit, you find it's not a real credit. So it's become a somewhat tainted market. That doesn't mean it's not important. It is an incredibly important market. And what's actually happened is, because of the huge recent focus on net zero from global corporations, the price of carbon offsets has started to increase dramatically, even to a point where we're now seeing investors actually buy carbon credits, not for their own business, but just to sit on them because they know the price is going in one direction. Now, if I could to take one more minute, Breed, so that's carbon offsets, and all I would say is it is a viable strategy, but you need to be very careful how you implement it, where you get the credits. And what you're going to see at the moment, that's very much what I would call big listed company solution. That market is evolving, and there will be techniques and ways for smaller companies to partake in that market as we move forward. If I could give you just a slight lens into the future, Breed, there's a whole new world starting to emerge, and it's called carbon reduction. There are, and again, this is definitely not for your members at this point. It's not even for most listed companies, but the very, very sophisticated companies are starting on this journey. And I will tell you today, in the next 5 to 10 years, this business will become huge. This is the concept. I mean, one example of it is a thing called direct air capture, where there's technologies today to suck carbon out of the air and to store it permanently. And what's happening is that large companies are making payments to these technology companies to do that, and then they claim that as an offset. And that's different to the classic type of offset. This is an offset from a direct investment you've made in carbon reduction. It is seen as the highest and most integral, solution in terms of carbon offsetting, but the cost is prohibitive at this stage. But I've discovered one thing. I've been in this sort of business for 20 years. When we start off on any of these new technologies, the cost is always prohibitive. But this agenda, is going in one direction, and the cost will come down. There will be greater take-up, and what you'll find is that these technology solutions will actually come to the fore someday.
Okay, Mike, you're actually scaring me now at such a rate. I also wish I was 20 years of age so I could actually start my career again, because it's definitely the area to be in. It's very, very exciting. I have tons of questions, so I have to bulldoze through. Eleanor, people are coming, we're really interested to see about the energy. At what point will the energy I consume in my business be 100% green? And even to use your own example through a greenhouse there, talk to us a little bit about that as concisely as you can.
Well, that is, and one of the things about the team at Green has is that everybody is passionate and committed to CO2 reduction. That is the reason for being of this organisation, and it's lovely to work with. And the young people in it are so passionate. But you're talking about electricity. I touched on it earlier. ESB networks under the government plan have committed that by 2030. With all of the upgrades that they are going to spend money on the system, that the electricity network should be 70% green by 2030, and that is their commitment. So in other words, we will have solar, we will have wind, probably some hydrogen by that point that will be feeding the grid. And this is the reason why electrification is part of the government plan. In terms of climate change. But can I just touch on one thing, something that's happening at the moment, which is the cost of electricity is absolutely going through the roof. And if you look back on recessions we've had in Ireland, going right back to the 70s, I can remember the one as a child and my father saying, oh my God, how are we going to heat this house? We have always been at the beck and call of the oil and the gas industry. How fantastic would it be if we were to adopt these policies and you have transparency of pricing and you're not a prisoner of what happens in the Middle East or what happens among Putin when they're discussing what's going to happen with oil prices? Because as somebody who ran an electricity company, when the prices go up, often there's no warning, and what happens is we all live with the consequences. We have the ability to actually unshackle ourselves from being prisoners of oil and gas, as well as saving CO2. So it's a win-win everywhere.
Absolutely. And Eleanor, I suppose, or both of you actually, this question is to, on the challenges, one of the challenges from the corporate sector is the actual cost of implementing decarbonisation strategies. Now, I agree with yourself, Mike, and obviously the business that you've got involved with on this particular one, the energy efficiencies is the solution there. But could you discuss how they'll offset other costs, whether it's a real barrier to progress on decarbonisation or not? And also, has there been some suggestion that some strategies are actually cost saving? It'd be great to hear the panel's view on this. And you might just come in on the back of that, Mike, because somebody has put it into the chat box as well in relation to, you said there might be some accounting issues in relation to the CapEx model that I think Eleanor mentioned. You might just clarify that, what they are, because I think that is misunderstood by the audience. I just want to clarify that, and then come back to the question I put to you there. Maybe Eleanor first.
Bree, that was such a long question. I'm picking up at the end of it, and then I'm trying to think, what is Mike saying? There's a problem with our solution. There's no problems, Mike. You don't pay any money and you get to operate and save carbon. Will we let Mike answer that question?
Yeah, let me deal with that though. I'm not actually talking about Eleanor's solution. I'm talking about energy efficiency, and it actually applies with corporate power purchase agreements as well. And it's a sort of a challenging barrier in the marketplace. So when an organisation such as Eleanor's clients, sort of enters into this kind of long-term contract to procure, an energy efficiency solution, but more likely if it's a solar or wind solution where it's provided under a corporate power purchase agreement, accounting law works in such a way that there is a real risk, if you're not careful, that the asset can end up in the balance sheet of the off-taker, even though the funding and the cost of the investment is always by the developer, as in the case of Eleanor's situation, and that's where you would expect it to end up. But there is a vagary in accounting law that says, if you're not careful, it can end up on the balance sheet of the off-taker. Now, the good news is that there are ways to solve that, but you can't just, if I'm entering into a corporate PPA with a developer, it's not as simple as just signing up a contract. I need to understand the structure. I need to understand to what extent I'm off-taking the electricity, to what extent I'm exporting the excess to the grid. And as it happens, it's the exporting the excess to the grid is one of the critical ways in which you can solve the accounting issue. So that's what I was referring to.
Okay.
Can I?
One.
You asked, yeah, I know. A bit like Eleanor, there was lots in that question. I was trying to unpick it. Let me go to a central point actually. I'll keep this very brief because I know the clock is ticking quickly. Yes, some decarbonisation solutions invariably will cost money, right? No two ways about it. However, think of the real cost. You know, the real cost is the cost if I do nothing. If I do nothing, I'm exposing myself to the fact that the market is changing. I'm exposing myself to the fact that my employees might no longer want to work with me. I'm exposing myself to the fact that my customers, if I'm not providing green goods and services, they will care and they will go elsewhere. And I'm exposing myself to the fact that more and more consumers and other stakeholders and investors, they care about how green my business is. If I'm irrespective of the cost, if I don't have access to employees, customers, and investors, I'm not going to have a business. That's what we call climate risk. And that's my central message. You know, we have to understand that the landscape is changing fundamentally. So yes, decarbonisation is a cost, but that's just looking at it just simply in terms of the cost of the solutions. We need to think about it in terms of the cost of the overall issue.
Okay, and I agree with that, and well put, Mike. Clearly, the carbonisation strategies that are going to be invested in by companies will require financing to some extent. What are the options for Irish companies at the moment, and what that they could be considering in developing financing solutions to assist with their decarbonisation efforts? Mike, you might just come in on that.
Yeah, in fact, I should do a call out for an event for your members just to note that's happening next week. It's called Climate Finance Week. It's organised by Sustainable Nation. It's a big event. I think it's been held in the AIB Bank Centre headquarters, but it's free to register. For this, I will answer your question, but this topic is going to be discussed in detail. The simple answer to your question, Breed, is that there is no shortage of capital today. There is, investors understand the opportunity, and we come back to that word again. They understand there's an unbelievable need for new finance to help companies decarbonize, to fund the developers, to fund some of these emerging technologies. So you will see organizations like, I don't know, Eleanor referred to the ESB, but you've got AIB, Kingspan, various others. Organizations are able to raise money using this technique called green bonds, which is really just, it's a name that's almost going to go out of fashion very quickly, but it's really appealing to investors who want their investment to go towards green projects. That market is thriving and growing exponentially. But the bottom line is the wider finance community, particularly here in Ireland, is responding. It's not perfect yet, but banks and other financial institutions recognize the opportunity, and they are developing a whole suite of new green products to actually help enable this transition to a low carbon economy.
Can I just touch on the opportunity for companies? First of all, it's an opportunity to show leadership to both your employees and also with your suppliers and your customers. It's also an opportunity to stand out in a busy market. For instance, you're in skincare and you change your packaging to sustainable packaging. What are the, I've been looking at what's available. It could be glass, it could be, in other words, it is an opportunity in a busy space to show leadership. The other thing that's really interesting is, I think people are going to go back to what we did a long time ago. I mean, I say this before, as a child, the only time I saw a strawberry was seasonal. And if I wanted strawberries at Christmas, they came in a tin. So people ate seasonally, but you also bought local. There is a huge opportunity for Irish businesses to actually push out their product in terms of, I don't want an orange that comes from Spain because of the carbon footprint that involves. I don't want a cabbage that comes from Brazil. I want a cabbage that comes locally because I am reducing my carbon footprint by buying local. So there are huge amounts of opportunities for people to think differently. And I actually see more opportunity. You said earlier you wish you were younger, Breed. I wish I was 18 again so that I can live in the world of 2040, 2050, when it's going to be cleaner, we're going to have less congestion, people will have less health problems. I mean, Mike and I were discussing this, the amount of people that die every year because of air quality isn't really even discussed. But in terms of, you're talking about financing, Green is going to fund your project. Not only we're going to fund it, we're going to handhold you for the long term through the journey to do with heat and energy. And it's one of the reasons that I got involved with this business, because I don't like complicated, and this actually is a very clear, simple way for people to immediately start making a change. And what we will do is we will assess your information, we will put a plan together, and then we will act on it. And you will have full visibility before you engage with the business, exactly what it's going to cost, exactly what the output is going to be for your business.
Okay, that's brilliant. And Eleanor, there's no doubt there'll be a special rate for Guaranteed Irish members now, since you're pitching those up. Absolutely, we put up on our members portal. As there are, because we've quite a lot of corporates tuned in today in terms of KPMG and the advice and all that. Mike and Eleanor, you've been a mind of information. I've tons of questions, so I'm going to bulldoze through them. The final question I have on my own agenda, though, is should government be utilising tax policy to incentivise the right type of climate change amongst us, the business owners and operators?
So for me, the answer is yes, all day long. And as you and your members know, Breed, the whole issue of tax incentivization has become a somewhat sullied, concept in recent years. We've seen some of the mad tax avoidance and evasion that simply just doesn't meet the current global temperature. But here's the reality: the most serious crisis we're facing is the climate crisis, number one. Number two, we've learned something over the last 200 years. Tax policy is the number one instrument that governments use to change behavior at a corporate and at an individual level. And I've seen this, and I've been advocating it for the past 12 months or so. We need to rethink the whole issue of tax policy. We need to encourage people to do things differently. And I'll give you some examples. There can be tax policies, for example, to give tax credits to people who make certain types of green investments. There could be tax policies encouraging people who retrofit their homes with energy efficiency solutions to get credits. There's a myriad of them. But what's actually happened is that, we've been thinking about carbon taxes and some of the punitive tax measures. I think the time now is to change the discourse, and the message from me and others to government that'll be interested in Eleanor's perspective is, think about how you can encourage behavior, because people, we know this, people respond to tax incentivization.
Okay.
I absolutely agree. I think the simple way to do it, and it would be a cost-effective way for government to manage it, is that when companies come to pay their corporation tax at the end of a financial year, that they have an audited account of how much carbon they have saved within the 12 months and what they're continuing to do, and that the government recognise that by giving them a reduction on their corporation tax. And that is a very simple way to manage it. Governments tend to have complicated and expensive ways of doing things, like, for instance, having to manage grant aid for people to do things, and then having to have watchdogs to make sure it's implemented. And I actually think accountancy practices, which are very, very heavily governed, as Mike will know, if they are prepared to sign off on a corporate reduction or CO2 reduction, we know it's real, and then government should recognize that and give tax reductions. I think that is the simplest, most practical way.
Okay, so I'm going to go straight to the chat box. Thank you, guys. Can Guaranteed Irish members come together as a collective and work together to declare a carbon reduction commitment? Surely this would be a huge opportunity to make a serious statement about an Irish business taking on carbon challenges altogether better. Oh, bang on to us. Well, we certainly will look at it. And look, we've the resources for the first time ever. So as a national organisation that's seen as this, and the G is so well known, seen as a symbol of trust and integrity, I think it's we're duty bound to do something in that vein, so we certainly will look at it. Here's a long question, so tune in. I did write it. While I appreciate we are not an Irish manufacturer, we're a small Irish family-owned company who import and distribute products for construction companies which are manufactured in Europe, USA and Asia. We do not manufacture but are interested in focusing on promoting and supplying products which are manufactured to meet the zero carbon standards. All our products are made from metals and alloys. We primarily deal with architects and main contractors like CIS, BAM, JJ Rashkin, etc. And while architects are interested in green buildings and products, the main contractor is the one having to pay for them, and inevitably companies who meet the standards are typically in Europe and more expensive. How should a company like ours move forward and achieve a greener building landscape in our field?
Off you go, Mike.
That's a tough question, and I wish I had a magic wand to solve all problems, and that one I definitely don't. And I refer to that actually as a concept known as carbon leakage. You know, there's competition. There's a concept that low carbon goods cost more than high carbon goods, and it's one of the problems that the EU is looking at through the on a cross-border basis with this carbon border adjustment mechanism. But I don't think I think that problem that's presented by the questioner is a very real problem, and I wish I could say that there's an easy solution. There's not. And like, but again, you know, I keep coming back to climate risk. I think it's good that person is becoming aware of it, because that, you know, the market dynamics are shifting very, very quickly here.
And I suppose sorry, Eleanor, but I assume, Mike, that's where you would at least demand that all the suppliers he's getting from, be they overseas, that they all have a carbon policy, so that he's buying from them and putting the pressure down the line, I assume.
Right, and that's what the European Union is trying to do. They're looking at it across the whole European Union, and they're saying if there's cheaper goods coming into the European Union with higher carbon content, they're going to level the playing field. So okay, we're at the early stage of leveling out this whole carbon leakage concept.
So this guy needs to change his model pretty fast and find a supplier closer to home.
Well, the other thing that will sort it out as well, you know, we touched on carbon and the cost of carbon. Carbon, I think at the moment is around 64 to 66 euros a ton. Would that be about right? I actually believe that carbon is going to go to 200, 300, 400 and upwards a ton as time goes on. So for instance, if you're importing from outside the EU currently, and within the next 18 months, the cost of carbon rise, well, that could actually balance out the prices anyway, because of the extra journey time, the coming long distance. But as Mike said, it's good to be aware of these things. But there are solutions in the construction industry. I mean, there's a company in the Middle East who are making cement products that use 20% less of a carbon footprint when they're manufacturing, and then when they're in situ, they do the same job as trees, and they actually absorb carbon. So there are changes happening everywhere, and I suppose all I would say is stay in touch with your industry and watch the changes that are happening. The World Economic Forum, which Mike is involved with, show fantastic products around the world that are making a difference on a constant basis.
Is there a common global standard for products that could be used to put the total carbon print on the product itself to make it easier for consumers to make informed, sustainable choices in easy terms which common people could understand? Mike or Eleanor?
Well, the simple answer very quickly is not that I'm aware of. The whole issue of reporting and standardization is a really, really hot topic. We will get there eventually, but we're not there yet.
So opportunity is the word, really, isn't it, for everything? Most of the impact measurement standards currently in use globally are at manufacturing and corporate end of things, where consumers and retail actually don't get to participate much. Or most of the impact measurement standards currently, or do you have any information on carbon offsetting schemes in Ireland?
So I am not aware of any particular carbon offsetting schemes in Ireland, but there are ways for individuals to actually buy carbon offsets. So I'll just give you one example, but there's tons of them out there. You can go to a company in Switzerland called Climeworks, which is actually doing this thing I spoke about earlier, direct air capture. And they were telling me recently that even though there's no system for individuals, there's no kind of reporting standard or anything, individuals care so much that, and they feel guilty about their own carbon footprint, they're going to this organization, paying them $1,000, $2,000 to actually buy an offset. And that for me is fascinating. And you're going to see the same thing with car companies and airlines, where they'll be sort of enabling their customers, individual customers, to buy offsets. This just shows the way the public mood is swinging very much in terms of action on climate.
Well, I will. Sorry, I just want to make some simple things. For instance, if you're ordering a taxi, every time you ring up, say, I want an electric car, If you're ordering from your local takeaway, tell them you don't want aluminium foil containers, or you might not be able to come back here anymore. The power of the consumer, or you're in the supermarket and say, I switched to my local vegetable shop because I am not buying my fruit and veg that's 3-layered packaged anymore. We all have the ability to make changes, and we all have the ability to, wherever we shop, to make our feelings known. That in itself will affect change.
And I've seen that ourselves. We do a lot of work with SuperValue and the whole conscious consumer persona, where they've started to introduce or reduce the amount of packaging in the fruit and veg space, and it's great. But more please, I suppose, is the message. Is there a guide available through any of the agencies out there, maybe through yourselves in KPMG, which guides small businesses generally a green plan to assist them in the execution and implementation of a green policy? Well, I'm going to answer that. We're going to work with different agencies to try and pull something together on that for our members. So we're certainly going to try and work on something in that space.
Breed,
Yes.
I'm going to help you there. You'd have to do a bit of searching, but I think the UK government has produced something like this for SMEs. I'm pretty certain of it.
Great. So we'll take that. We won't quite copy and paste. We'll just make it Irish and guaranteed Irish for our members, so it's relevant to our market here. But there's a bit of work to be done, and we'll definitely be calling on you, Mike and Eleanor, to help us on that. But I think that's a great first step for all businesses out there who are really committed to it. Should more organisations be linking climate action performance to bonuses? Is this something that more businesses should adopt to shift behaviour? Interesting.
The answer is yes. In fact, I'll be happy to share a report we're doing this that we're releasing in advance of COP26. That question is touching on a much bigger issue, which is the human capital aspects of decarbonisation. But incentivization linked to carbon performance is now taking hold. It's not a new idea at all. We're going to hear much more about it in the future.
I absolutely agree. That's a great idea. And I would also say to companies out there, have the conversation among your employees and find who in your organization has the enthusiasm for this, and make them your ambassador within the organization to start doing a bit of this work. And you'll be amazed what they'll come back with if they're genuinely passionate about it. And for anyone out there who would like a conversation with me around their electricity piece, I'm quite happy to make myself available.
Okay, and we can make those contacts they can come through us, Eleanor. So before we wrap up, I'd like to just do a quick summary. The big thing I've taken away from this morning, and I'm hugely, I've learned so much myself by just hosting it, so thank you so much to the speakers and indeed the audience who put in such relevant questions, is the number one thing we all need to do is look at energy efficiency, and that's something we can change immediately in our everyday life and our working life. The second thing is to look at renewables, and let's see how we can put those in. Eleanor gave a great example of the business she's one of the businesses she's involved in, Greenhaas, Greenhaas. Again, there are innovative ways of doing it. I also see another big thing as opportunities, not just for change, but for tracking the change, rewarding, offsetting. All of those businesses could actually be done and run out of here. And there's certainly an opportunity for people out there who understand that game or are willing to put time into understanding that game. I suppose the big thing for us as well is look at all the techniques and technologies around waste that Mike alluded to, which are hugely interesting. We've a lot of work to do here in Guaranteed Irish when we get up and going properly in terms of creating that guide and try to help our own businesses, which will be an evolving, shifting sands all the time, but we certainly want to engage with you out there to do that. My last thing I suppose to say is that there seems to be definitely misunderstandings, or maybe I won't say distrust, but lack of confidence. The consumer, I suppose, listening to Mike and here, needs to rest assured that the government have this and they're on top of it. They're being driven really by European standards and global standards. And as Mike said, that our big nations, our powerful nations around the world may not agree on much, but they agree that it's urgent. So I suppose it's up to us to do our best. But I suppose if the government were to do one thing, it would be to reassure that this is happening and maybe show us the baby steps that are being taken in terms of 2030, 2050, so people take assurance for that, and it's always on the agenda. Every one of us, I suppose, saw the weather changes this summer. We've all just come through COVID. It's been a life-changing experience for most, one way or another. Certainly for our children and for the generation ahead of us, it's been massively life-changing, and we've no choice. We've no choice but to get on this bandwagon. It is the new game in town. We have to be part of it. Thank you very, very much to Eleanor Mcavoy, who's joined us, and to Mike Hayes from KPMG. I know we've only scratched the surface, so we're going to have these again. As we go on our journey with our sustainable programme, we'd love to repeat and do more of these. As things evolve, we'd love to have you back, and thank you so much for joining us.